Okay, guys, welcome to my masterclass about how to align to your soul and release ego identity. So, I know that this is a topic that a lot of people are dealing with, especially with everything going on in the world. And it's more important than ever for us to become aware of who we really are because as you can tell there are a lot of surface layers of the planet and of personalities that are really being tested to see how strong the foundation is. And if you are paying attention, which I try to keep pretty dissociated from in the news world and stuff, just because I don't really know that media is giving us 100% the truth, you'll notice that things are starting to really crack in the surface of our reality. And this is really important for the representation of what's going on in our inner worlds, because something that you'll hear me talk about specifically is that your inner state always creates your outer state. So the inner state comes first and then the outer state comes second. And that is something that is just a law of the universe. This is how you attract. This is the law of attraction 101, basically. And if we really want to become the masters of our lives, then we have to master our internal space and align to our soul. So, the first thing that I want to touch on really is what's the difference between soul alignment and what's the difference between soul alignment and ego identity. And I think that the best way to describe the difference is through felt experience. So I think pointing out what the ego is first and pointing out what it's not will be easiest, because trying to put words around what your soul is and how to align to your soul is much, much harder than it is to point out what the ego is, because ego is exactly that. Ego is labels, it is structures, it is belief systems, it is the personality that we put forth into the world. So, from the time you're born into this physical plane till about 7 years old, your human mind is starting to create this ego identity, and it's being conditioned by the environment around you, the people that you're constantly being exposed to in those ages. And so you start to live your life truly from the lens of that 0 to 7-year-old human. But as we start to create a not a safety net. I'm trying to put words towards soul alignment. As you can tell, like it really is, it's so difficult to explain what the soul is and like how to align to the soul, because the soul is formless, whereas the ego is all form. And that's really the big difference. But when you're aligning to your soul, like we're really just deconditioning and taking away all those layers that we're learning from the ages from 0 to 7. So I think it's really important to note what those differences are, and this might not even click for you now because it's such a woo-woo kind of topic. But it's also important to note that you are the creator, and it's weird to say because I know that there are some of you who might be watching this who identify with a particular religion or particular way of of living or thinking, and it's just not like aligning to your soul. Just is exactly the opposite. Like, it is the idea that you came into this world completely pure. And soul alignment is getting back to that pureness, that pure consciousness that you may or may not have realized that you were. And you may not even realize that you are still. You may, when someone asks you who you are, you might find that you explain all of the things that you do. So, for instance, for me, like, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a coach, I'm a mother, I'm, I don't know, what else do I do? It's all the things that you do and the things that you identify with. But those statements are not who you are intrinsically. Who you are intrinsically is consciousness, it is being. Like, if you ask a dog who it is, they don't reply that they're a dog. They just are there. And we see them as a dog. We see them as separate from us. But if you have ever had an animal, I have 2 dogs, I can feel their soul essence. And that's why I connect to them so well, is that they just work, they live with me, they're being with me, and I just love having their presence around. And that is exactly what soul alignment is. So I think maybe I should tell you guys a little bit more about this story, even though stories are all ego created, because stories are all time based and the soul is completely timeless. So this, again, I know sounds so confusing, but it's because your mind is trying to understand something that cannot be understood. And I think that prefacing a story with that information should help, but it might make things more confusing. So if it does, I do apologize in advance, but it is really difficult to explain in words, in vowels and consonants, what the soul is. So I'm going to use the ego to contrast what the soul is. So I grew up in a very tumultuous upbringing. I'm the first generation American in my whole entire family, born here in Texas. And I also have the only family unit within my big Filipino family that has experienced multiple divorces with my parents. Oh, there's something in my eye, excuse me. Sorry, 1 second. I know this is totally distracting, but I cannot see. Okay, much better. It got really dark. So I left off at being the first generation American, first family having multiple divorces in the family, and having just a very broken family in general. And then on top of that, I had a very abusive childhood. All my parents were very neglectful, and you can imagine what conditioning I picked up from 0 to 7. And I think it's important to note that I have wonderful relationships with my parents now because I was able to really understand and identify with the true me instead of that little kid from 0 to 7 who was being conditioned at the time. But yeah, it was pretty tumultuous. Like, there's a lot of abuse, there was alcoholism, there were drugs, there was sexual molestation, and there were all of these experiences that I would never, ever, ever wish upon anybody to live through. But the beauty about having these kinds of experience that have such deep pain and deep suffering allows not only me, but I have met other people who have suffered through similar, if not worse, situations, who have able to truly understand who they are, and thus disidentifying from the mind and the victim mentality that is that ego identity. The reason why I don't like telling these stories is not because I'm ashamed of these stories. I love and appreciate every single experience that I've ever had because it has taught me to be who I am here in this moment in front of this camera. And I think it's I mostly don't like telling the story because the second you identify with my story or a different aspect of it, you're already in the ego mentality. So it's good to know that the ego and the mind are very tricky. So the tools that I've used, now that you understand a little bit more about what the ego is, I can start to give you some tips about the soul alignment. So soul alignment is truly just being with whatever is happening at the moment, because whatever is happening is what's happening. It's perfectly a whole and complete experience, no matter what feelings come up for you. And it's important to remember that any feelings or emotions that come up for you, any triggers per se that come up for you, are merely thought patterns and mind forms that your body or your mind is identifying with. So again, it's that ego coming through the back door. The tools that I've used have been in no order, right? Have been yoga, which is really the first step into my disidentification with my ego and disidentification with the mind through my body. So it gave me a way to move the energy that was stuck in my body from all the trauma that my body experienced and that my mind experienced. But truly, it was for my body. And then a little bit down the line, I found meditation, which was pretty much yoga for my mind. So creating that inner stillness and disidentifying myself from the thoughts. So instead of having a thought that was like, I'm so sad because of this happening to me, or it's so hard for me to feel loved because, I have daddy issues, or whatever identification that I had in my mind, those thoughts or the disidentification turned into like, I have sadness. It's visiting, but that's not who I am. And I experienced this hurt at a previous time, and I choose not to carry that with me today. A really interesting story that I heard one time was about a man who was wrongly imprisoned for tens of years, like I want to say 40 or 50 years. And he was innocent. He didn't, I mean, like, we all know that this happens all the time, so this could literally be anyone. But I do remember this being a story that was floating around. But this guy, he was wrongly imprisoned and then finally let out and was exonerated. And someone asked him, aren't you upset that that you were wrongly accused and had to spend so much time in prison? Like, aren't you upset and aren't you mad, and don't you want to get back at the people who forced you to lose your life? And his response was, if I stay upset or if I choose to be angry, I am continuing the prison that I have tried so hard to get out of. And I think that quote has been such a game changer. Sorry, my dog is freaking out. Such a game changer, because it shows that, like, you have the choice to recreate your life. Like, are you going to live your life through the lens of the past experiences that you've had, or are you going to live your life in the now and know that you can change the way that you see the world? The way that I see the world is that everything that I've experienced has been perfectly timed, because it has allowed me to become the highest version of myself. And I continue to be on that path because I use my tools. Now, I told you a little bit about meditation, a little bit about yoga. The other tools that I want to share with you are the books that I started to read. So I always thought that I was not a reader. Like, I did not consider myself someone who read or liked books, but it actually was just a limiting belief that I had about myself, because the second that I found a book that I truly enjoyed, my life changed forever. I believe that the first book that I picked up that I was like, holy shit, like, I love books, is, I think it was a book by Sadhguru called The Inner Engineering. I think it's on my bookshelf here. The Inner Engineering of, it's called Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. And it talks about, because at the time I was like, I'm an analytically minded person, like, I like to build things. So it was kind of a bridge between the yoga philosophy and the meditation philosophy. At this time, I hadn't actually picked up meditation yet, even. So when I started reading, I just had the yoga philosophy that I really resonated with, but like hadn't pointed to yet. Like, I hadn't gone to yoga teacher training or anything like that, but I just knew deep in my soul that there was something that I believed, but couldn't put it into words. And this book really created a physical connection for me. And after I read that book, I was like, oh my gosh, I love reading. And what I realized was that I loved reading spiritual books. And so I don't necessarily recommend that book for everybody, because not everybody's mind works analytically like mine. Like, I went to an engineering school, so it just kind of fit well with where I was at consciously. But the tools that I do recommend, and the books that I specifically recommend, are The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and then Wherever You Go, There You Are by Jon Kabat-Zinn. These two books are extremely simply written, such that you can start to understand the practice of aligning to your soul. Because again, putting words onto the process and the practice of soul alignment is an irony in itself. But I hope that it opens the door for you at the very, very least. So those are some of the simple tools that I'll recommend. So practicing yoga, meditation, those 2 books. If you can start with those, you'll start to hopefully open up that door into a different way of being and a different way of living your life. Whereas most of us are living through our minds, identified with our minds and with our conditioning. When you start to align to your soul, you drop that identification to the mind and realize that you are source energy, experiencing itself through a human experience. So I want to do a little practice with you guys. And it's similar to meditation, but really it's just kind of creating that felt experience of what ego is versus what soul alignment is. So what I want you to do is sit up nice and tall, whether you're sitting in a chair or on a bed or on the floor or whatever. Excuse me, sit up nice and tall and close your eyes. Take a few breaths by inhaling through your nose and sending that breath down into the belly. And then exhale out, emptying the lungs out through the nose. Do that a couple more times. And notice if there's anything that comes up for you in your mind. Maybe a to-do list, maybe something that comes up where you're just like, I gotta do something. That is your ego. But if you keep breathing and placing your attention on the spaces between the thoughts, and the more and more you practice, these spaces will get bigger. That, my friends, is soul alignment. You can go ahead and open your eyes. That's basically it. That's what aligning to your soul is, and you just do that over and over and over again every day. Whenever you notice your mind taking over, and then you realize that you can come back to the present moment, come back to the sensations on your body, come back to your breath, all of those things that are happening right now in the moment, in the present moment. That is called mindfulness. That moment where you're like, okay, I'm in my head and I'm coming back into my body. That's mindfulness. And then the more that you can come back into the presence, that whole process of going from mindfulness to presence, mindfulness to presence, mindfulness to presence, that is the practice of soul alignment. And the mind is going to say, that's too simple. That's way too easy. There's no way it's going to work. And again, it's the mind coming in through the back door, trying to trick you, trying to make you feel like it is much bigger of a process to be here and be. If you guys have any questions or need any advice, I don't like to really use the word advice because I truly believe that you have every single answer that you need within yourself. But if you need some guidance or just someone to hold space for you, I'm here. I hope that helps. And I hope you guys have a really good day. Thanks for listening. Bye.